Good morning and welcome to the Southpointe CEO Association's To The Point. This morning, I have the pleasure of moderating this panel, the session, and my name is Stacey Brodak. I'm Vice President of Institutional Advancement and University Relations at Waynesburg University. I have the pleasure of joining me today of Dr. Larry Stratton. I'd like to tell you a bit about him. We're going to have a discussion regarding the election and important issues that would be relevant to Washington County and to all of us that we care about so much. A bit about Dr. Stratton. He is the director of the Stover Center for Constitutional Studies and Moral Leadership. He is an associate professor of ethics and constitutional law. The Stover Center is led by Dr. Stratton, who has taught courses relating to law and ethics at Georgetown University Law Center, the University of Pennsylvania, and other universities. He has also written articles and co-authored 2 books on constitutional law and ethics. Dr. Stratton holds his PhD and Master's of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary, a JD from Georgetown University Law Center, and a BS in Economics from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. He is a former clerk to U.S. District Judge Claude Hilton of the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. He's a member of the Bar in Virginia and the District of Columbia. He is also an ordained Presbyterian minister, president of the Rotary Club in Waynesburg, and a member of the board of directors of the Amani Christian Academy of Pittsburgh. He's a graduate of Leadership Pittsburgh and vice chair of the Greene County Planning Commission. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you very much.
This morning, I wanted to start off maybe, Larry, by asking you if we could, to give us a broad overview of just to level set of the different races that are happening in Washington County, and then maybe we'll progress to the larger scale through the U.S. So would like just some thoughts about what's on the ballot this November.
Okay, that's terrific. Well, we're familiar, of course, with the presidential election. With Biden against our incumbent president, President Trump. There are some congressional races that we have every 2 years. The Congress is up for re-election. We have incumbent representatives Reichenthal and Lamb who are facing re-election campaigns. In the state level, we have the state treasurer, the attorney general, and the auditor general races up for grabs. And then we have some state representative races. Pam Snyder and Tim O'Neill are up for re-election and face challenges. And then there are some state Senate races as well, such as Senator Ivano and Senator Ward. And then there might be some local races in each community, but they're the overall general races.
Okay. Could we start maybe, I would suggest, Larry, that probably most of our audience this morning are really familiar with our local races. I thought maybe it would be helpful to talk a little bit about, I think personally, even myself, we know our local folks, we likely interact with them a great deal. We're very interested on the national scale and we see lots of information about that. Could you talk a bit about some of the state races in those row houses and the significance of those events where we may not necessarily know those folks as well?
Okay, that's a very good question, because we have the Auditor General's race between Timothy DeFore for the Republicans and Nina Ahmed for the Democrats, and neither is an incumbent right now. In the Attorney General, we have incumbent Josh Shapiro against Heather Heidelberg, who is the Republican. Shapiro is the Democrat. And then the treasurer's race, the Republican Stacey Garrity against Joseph Purcell. And the Auditor General's race is very interesting, because the office of the Auditor General goes to the mid-19th century in Pennsylvania, where the Auditor General audits everything within the Commonwealth in terms of governance. And it's a very significant post. We have 2 very famous Auditor Generals who went on to even larger offices, both by the name of Robert Casey. So that Robert Casey Sr. was the Auditor General in the 70s and 80s, who became the governor of Pennsylvania. And then our current, one of our 2 U.S. senators, Senator Bob Casey Jr. was also the Auditor General. So that race is a springboard to higher office. And then in the Attorney General's race, of course, the Attorney General is the chief legal officer of the state government. Former Governor Tom Corbett was the Attorney General before becoming governor. And, people think that the current Attorney General, Josh Shapiro, has his eyes on the governor's office himself at the end of the Wolf term, because Governor Wolf will not be up for re-election because he will have completed 2 terms. And then, of course, the treasurer's race, too, is very significant. All 3 of these races tend to be overshadowed by the national races and the local races, but obviously they're very important.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can we talk, and let's go next maybe to Senate. I think the Senate election is really important this year, both at the state level and also at the national level. And I thought maybe you could provide some perspective on that.
That's right. Well, I think of the 50 senators in Pennsylvania, half are up for re-election right now. And then at the federal level, of course, it's the third of the U.S. Senate of the 100 senators. And there is no Senate race in the national level in Pennsylvania. Neither Senator Casey nor Senator Toomey are up for a re-election this year. Senator Toomey announced just a few days ago that he would not run for a 3rd term in the U.S. Senate, nor would he run in the governor's race either, which is a significant issue. The Wall Street Journal lamented his decision the other day. And at the national level, the Senate, I think it's 53 seats for the Republicans, and so it's very close, 50-50. The vice president casts the tie. And there are a few Senate races that are, there are about 4 or 5 of them that are very close right now. And we will see what happens on whenever the election ends. I mean, theoretically, we would know 3 weeks from this morning what the outcome of all the Senate races would be, as well as the presidential election. Although with so much mail-in voting and the delays relating to COVID, we probably won't know. Maybe for a week or so, or even more after the election, to know the outcome of all these races.
Yeah, thank you. Naturally, we want to discuss the national election, but we also want to be sure not to necessarily analyze each candidate in order to remain unbiased, but maybe it would be helpful. We would like to talk a little bit about it. I'd like to ask you some questions about pertinent issues that I think are important to everyone and that we know and we're hearing play out in front of us as we gear up for this election. I think you bring such an interesting background given what you do, obviously the law degree, the constitutional piece, you teach history classes, you teach economics classes. I think all of those things kind of make you a perfect kind of analyst of some of these issues. But let's start with your economics background. I wanted to ask if you could talk a bit about some factors. I think there's a lot around the economy that either person as our president will have to deal with. One maybe, and just some reflections that you're seeing from an economic standpoint on the pandemic impacts of COVID-19, cost and length of recovery, CARES Act, subsidies, all around that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what this next president's going to have to deal with and the economy, the impacts.
That's right. Well, COVID is the big unusual factor of this election. We haven't had a pandemic. There was one in 1918, the Spanish flu, and they're still debating the impacts of that. I know someone who read a book about the Spanish flu last December, and he was prescient for picking up that book, I guess, on Amazon to learn about it, to see whether there are any parallels to today. I mean, we all experienced the lockdown beginning in March and heading through the summer. Some American states are on greater lockdown, and then here in Western Pennsylvania, I was in New York City this past weekend and had a much more sense of a frozen economy than it does in our corner of the Commonwealth. It appears as though we're going through a V-shaped recovery. There is a collapse in the economy, and it seems to be picking up pretty rapidly as as people are, engaged in greater commerce and activity. But of course, it's with the question mark of what is the future of the virus. Is there a new wave coming? In the past few days, it looks like there is a surge as autumn is upon us. There's the rush to have a vaccine. I heard this morning that 5 companies are very close to coming up with a vaccine, although some of the testing has been delayed. And so these are the question marks that we just don't know about. And so many industries are suffering. People are afraid to a large degree to travel on airplanes. And so we don't know what that will be. People in the restaurant industry, the restaurant owners, and all of the many people who work in restaurants have really had a rough time, as they're not able to have businesses that as normal, among other areas. And that's where there is the debate of whether or not there should be another bill in Congress to give people a bailout, a temporary bailout. State and local governments are affected by the loss in tax revenue with the decline in commerce. And who knows what will happen before the election. I have my doubts as to anything will happen, but maybe there will be something. I mean, of course, lingering over this is the question of the federal debt. We now have an enormous enormous amount of federal debt that exceeds the gross domestic product, really for the first time since World War II. And, in a sense, we are fighting a world war, but who knows? How will that be financed? Will there be future taxation? Is the Federal Reserve going to be there just to print more money, which potentially could lead to some inflation? So this is all very sobering news. And then, of course, we look at how COVID is changing our lives. I mean, what is the future of commercial real estate as more and more people are working at home? So the commercial real estate market is down right now, but the housing market is bursting as people are working at home. People are buying second homes when they can. And so there are a lot of intriguing question marks. And then you add the issues of global trade that are going along with that. One thing I came across the other day is that for the past eight months, actually, the value of American exports of petroleum and natural gas, fossil fuels, has really contributed to our nation's exports. And certainly lingering in the economy is the future of energy in general. And in this corner of Pennsylvania, the fracking and natural gas issues are at the forefront as well.
Thank you for that. You brought up an interesting point, and one that I noticed just having friends that are in the real estate market. I have seen lately, they have just talked about business booming. So that makes great sense to me that we're working from home. People want better space to work in. And that seems to be at least one area of our economy where things are really positive, which is great.
Mm-hmm. And the Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates very low, which is helping the real estate industry, at least in the short run. So, I mean, there are a lot of question marks when you teach economics right now. And we just had a midterm exam, and tomorrow we will look at each one of these issues in greater depth as the semester continues in Waynesburg.
Excellent. You also teach history, constitutional law courses. I did want to spend a few minutes, and that particularly the constitutional law piece, being the director of our Stover Center. I think you'll have very good, and this is an area I've heard you speak about before, actually at the prior election in 2016, and specifically the Supreme Court. So we're seeing a lot of information in regards to the election to the Supreme Court, the composition of that, where it goes from here. I thought maybe you could provide a little history of size and scope of the Supreme Court, significance of those appointments, and then also just the nomination process. People talk about, hurry up or we should wait. Mm-hmm. I'm just interested to hear your perspective on all of that.
Okay, well, yes, that is a fascinating issue. I've spoken about the Supreme Court several times over the years, and I often will just quote the name of a justice and that person's age. And it sounds sort of morbid to do that, but you look at some of these numbers and you realize that most of the justices are over 60, and then 5 of them are over 65 and going up to Justice Breyer, who's 82. Demographically, there will be openings ahead for these lifetime appointees, as we've just experienced with the passing of the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So this is a lingering issue in the judiciary. In fact, there have been some calls to limit the terms of justices, not for life terms. You've seen all kinds of proposals in the past few weeks. Of course, the big issue, right now we have Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who is testifying before the U.S. Senate after she was nominated by President Trump, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think a week after the passing of Justice Ginsburg. Former Vice President Biden and Senator Harris are upset about that. They would rather have that ability potentially, if they are elected, to make this appointment. But early on, we've had these battles. After the defeat of President John Adams, our second president, he actually nominated the great Chief Justice John Marshall to the Supreme Court. The Jeffersonians were not happy with that, who had recently won the presidency and the U.S. Senate. But Adams went ahead with the Federalist Senate and confirmed Marshall. Of course, not everyone who was confirmed in that set of appointments got their official commissions, which led to the great Supreme Court case of Marbury versus Madison. So what I'm just saying, that in the political process, Bismarck said it's like making sausage, the German chancellor, and this is what we're seeing. It's not very, very pretty from what I understand, although I've never been to a butcher shop to actually see sausage being made. But there have been changes in the size of the court. I know that Biden and Harris have been a bit ambiguous about whether they would be in favor of increasing the size of the Supreme Court. But the numbers actually have shifted from 6 to 5 to 7 to 9 to 10 and back to 9 again. And basically the first 100 years of the United States. After the Civil War, the number solidified at 9. During the Lincoln administration was increased to 10. It was partly to checkmate some Southerners on the Supreme Court in the Civil War. Other personalities beside Adams, Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, he was upset at the court a few times, particularly fighting over the banks. There were changes. But since the 1870s, the number's been 9, and then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sought to increase the size of the court, as initially the Supreme Court was striking down some New Deal legislation. And that was, the story is that there was a switch in time that saved 9. Justice Owen J. Roberts from Eastern Pennsylvania actually had been a critic of the New Deal, and he changed his vote to be in favor of it. And there was political opposition to the court packing plan. So Roosevelt never got his way. The New Deal was upheld. And we've had 9 ever since. Now, Justice Ginsburg thought that 9 was a good number to deal with. There's a benefit of having an odd number of justices so that there would never be a tie. And that's one of the issues on the table right now. Now, Roosevelt suffered politically when he had his court packing plan. One person who actually testified against it was a judge, Judge Knox from the Southern District of New York. I mention him because he was a graduate of Waynesburg University who went to the University of Pennsylvania Law School. And I dare say he said that Penn was easy after his challenging pre-law courses at Waynesburg University or Waynesburg College at the time. I hope my students will someday say that to me. I have 20 students in law school right now, so we'll hear their reports. Several of them have gone on and they're now practicing lawyers. So that's my summary about the Supreme Court. There always is more to talk about on that front.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much. I do want to remind our participants that if you would like to offer a question, there is a Q&A button on the screen. That is where you would select that to be able to submit a question, and we certainly will try to get those in front of Dr. Stratton before we close today. So just a good reminder there if you do want to reach out. Thank you very much. Dr. Stratton, if we could move forward, you mentioned briefly already energy. We know energy is very important to this region, particularly, always has been for a very long time. With the proposals on the table for what energy looks like moving forward, and there are different issues in different parts of the country. That's certainly one for us that's important. I'm just curious if you have any perspective on the policies that are being looked at in either regard and the impacts those could have on that industry for this region.
Okay, no, it's obviously very important. Soon after I moved to Waynesburg about 10 years ago, I had a conversation with a local government official who noted that most of the economic activity in Greene County, and it's certainly true in Washington County as well, takes place under the ground. They're saying that there's lots of coal underneath us, and there's lots of natural gas at various levels as well. And it's like you have to put your mind to what's going on under the ground. And that in itself is fascinating geologically, how that happened millions upon millions of years ago. But for our purposes, it's like, what is the future of each one of these industries? I had barely heard of the term horizontal fracking when I was first interviewed at Waynesburg, I believe in 2009 in the summer. But someone at Waynesburg told me it's a new issue in this area, and certainly we have seen it in the past 10 years. And so much of Southpointe itself is relating to the energy industry. And I'm not sure people from other ends of Pennsylvania really appreciate how the economic rebirth of this region is so dependent upon the discovery of fracking. And I know that in Greene County, everyone is talking about it all the time. You cannot sit on the main street or high street without seeing natural gas trucks drive by. So we know that that much of the support of President Trump deals with the issue of fracking and his defense of the coal industry. Although the coal industry, as the price of coal has gone down, that has been in a decline, but that's been offset to a large degree with jobs and employment related to the natural gas world. And this is where former Vice President Biden is he's facing some questioning of what his position actually is. And I think it's related to the general issue that he's trying to deal with. There's an article this morning in the Wall Street Journal saying that on regulation, Biden keeps everyone guessing, and it was dealing with Wall Street regulation at that point. In order to get the nomination, he made some comments, particularly in a debate with Bernie Sanders, saying that he, I think, end new fracking. And then later he said that he would limit fracking on federal lands. And Senator Harris made this reference last week in the debate with current Vice President Pence. And there's a sense of ambiguity there as he's trying to sort out his position. So obviously people in this region will have to make a decision about which candidates really would be protecting this important area of our own commerce, it seems to me.
Thank you for that reflection. If we could, I have a few more questions for you, but I thought it might be helpful. To break this up a little and also to give you time to respond, I want to go into predictions next and maybe talk a bit about that. But we're interested in what our participants might predict for the area as well. So we have two questions for you. The first one would be, who do you think will win in Pennsylvania? So we have both of those there. And the second question question would be, who do you think will win nationally? So we're interested, and that'll lead us to a discussion where I'd like Dr. Stratton to go next, is a bit about the importance of the different states, and certainly Pennsylvania being one of those important states and the decision factor here. I see the polls coming in now, and we can look at your answers. So if you'll keep responding there, this is just your prediction. What do you think where the race is and who's going to win? So the numbers are continuing in. All of you voted. A few more seconds to get your votes in. So we are, we're looking at, just to give you some sense of where everybody voted. This is terrific. Well, interesting, because it's not what I would have predicted. But who will win PA? The voters, our participants predict a 50-50 split, literally, yeah, dead even split in Pennsylvania. And then in the presidency, obviously there's a lead there, a swing there for Biden-Harris, 58% versus 42. Dr. Stratton, I'd like, just kind of taking that's naturally we talk about Pennsylvania being a really important factor in this election. What other states should we be watching, and how important, maybe first, how important is Pennsylvania? Is it indeed, important? And then number two, what other states should we be watching?
Well, I grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania, in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, and went to college in Philadelphia. So like so many people, I think Pennsylvania is very important. As we know, the Constitutional Convention and the Continental Congress that gave us the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution are in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia at Independence Hall they were. And of course, the Battle of Gettysburg saved the Union. So I'm imbibed in the importance of Pennsylvania history. And here we see it again, that it's the Keystone State. It's difficult to do the math of the Electoral College to reach 270 electoral votes without winning Pennsylvania. And that actually will be Tuesday's lecture in my American government class at Waynesburg. We look at the Electoral College, and there used to be the idea of a blue wall for the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan as being the states that it was presumed that Hillary Clinton would win. And then late at the night of the election, it turns out in 2016 she lost those states. If you add Florida and North Carolina, you really have the states which are expected to determine the election. You can predict most of the others, so that the headline in this morning's Observer Reporter was that Biden and Trump both focus on swing states. Trump was in, I think, Johnstown yesterday, and Biden was in Florida yesterday. I think Trump was in Florida over the weekend. So so we live in an exciting place. If you want to see a presidential candidate, we live in the place to do it. If you have the time to go to the rallies and or go hear one of the speakers of the two. And then, of course, other states just don't get the attention. Delaware is going to go for Biden. Virginia used to be a swing state, and now it's pretty much in the Democratic camp. So this is where we are right now. But the other point to remember is that there always are surprises once the polls come in. There are states that people thought would not be in play that suddenly, in retrospect, are in play. And that is correlated with the Senate races, too. There are several Senate races that seem to be very close when you would not think they would be, such as Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, for example. His reelection is being questioned. There's a great deal of money in this race on both sides of the aisle. There's a great deal of enthusiasm for the different candidates in different places. I was in Philadelphia, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, and got off the Schuylkill Expressway. I was trying to avoid a traffic jam, which is always what happens when I go there. And there were Biden signs everywhere. When I drive in the country around coming up here this morning, I saw a bunch of Trump signs. So you cannot look at the signs in your area to get a sense of what it's like in the totality of the Commonwealth. And I think that's a whole issue of marketing as well. What leads a person to have one or two or even three or four signs for a particular candidate in their front yard? And who knows about what that really shows. But that is where we are. I hear that some of the suburbs around Pittsburgh, in Fox Chapel and Mount Lebanon have a lot of Biden signs, and then other places it's more balanced. But it all depends, as we know, about people either voting by absentee or mail-in voting, or getting up in the morning, going to a poll, standing in line. And with a 50-50 prediction for Pennsylvania itself, it shows that some of this is voter turnout dependent. And in this corner of the Commonwealth, historically, it actually was so solidly Democratic. And then in the last election, many people who had voted for Obama and other Democratic candidates in the past, particularly in Greene County, I know among coal miners, that there has been a shift. And we'll see whether that continues.
Yeah. Thank you for that perspective. We did have a question come in on with the Q&A. You really talked a great deal about significance in Pennsylvania. The question specifically was, it's been reported that Republicans are closing the registration gap with Democrats in Pennsylvania. Obviously, that would play into the swing state status. I don't know if you have any information regarding those numbers, but.
That's very interesting. In fact, this morning, Tom Edsel, one of the columnists for the New York Times, made a comment, things that might lead to anxiety for Biden. And he did note the increase in Republican registration in several states, which tend to be the swing states, including Pennsylvania. So of the new registrants, most of them actually are Republican registrations, that people are switching their parties. And it is significant to see how this happens. And it is the people themselves ultimately make all of these decisions, that the pundits and the professionals just sort of sit back and watch.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm actually curious, I'm going to switch gears a minute. I'm kind of curious a little bit about, we'll wrap up here in a moment, but as a college professor, you are teaching courses to students that are at that age range that this is probably the first election that they'll be voting in. I would be interested in what is their discussion, what is their perspective, what are they asking you, how are they interpreting all of this? This seems, I think, to all of us and everybody you talk to, this feels more crazy is the term people use, or more just people are more impassioned, people are more vocal than they have been in the past. What do students think of all of that?
It's I think there's the general view that they think it's maybe bizarre is the word, that there's so many different factors up in the air relating to this race. Now, actually at noon today, my students in the Stover program, the 20 Stover scholars who focus on political and ethical questions, will be gathering for lunch. And what they're going to be doing is discussing various polls, like basically what we're doing right now. Leading up to a grand university discussion on Friday called Students Speak, in which we're going to discuss the presidential election in depth. So I'm looking forward to hear more about what students think. But in the papers that I've read in my government classes, it's been fun because the students have taken up all of these issues which we've discussed in their own papers, whether there should be mail-in voting, what the registration deadline should be, what the status of the electoral college should be, what whether or not it was a prudent idea for President Trump to fill the Ruth Bader Ginsburg seat as quickly as he did, and what the Senate should do. So I think the students are very alert. They might not know how unusual it is because this is their first election, although many of them have memories 4 years ago when they might not have been able to vote, but at least they were paying attention. So yes, like everyone else, we're trying to learn what is going on, and that you can learn from someone you speak to at the 7-Eleven or you know, the gas station, or I was speaking to someone who was speaking to people in taxi cabs trying to figure out what is going on. And I think that's the challenge for each one of us, because we all function within our own circles, that we don't know, you know, what other circles and what other people are thinking.
Sure. I have two questions actually that came in on the chat, and I think we'll wrap up after that. One is, what role do you think independents play in this election?
Oh, that's a great question. They're the ones that are really, you know, being bidden upon in the races. I mean, in a sense, I guess the challenge of a candidate for each party is to, you know, make sure that the enthusiastic base comes out and votes for them. And I know at the recent debate, Biden made the comment, you know, I am the Democratic Party, distinguishing himself with some of the more, you know, left-wing elements of that party. I think they were talking about the Green New Deal at that point, which I didn't mention, which lurks behind all of the fracking questions. But you know, generally independents are more moderate voters who don't like the extremes of either party. So the candidates need to capture their nomination and capture the passion of their party and get other people to switch to their side potentially. But they also have to appear to sort of the middle reasonable voter. And I think we probably, each one of us, have people we know in mind who fit in that category. I tell one of my friends, actually his wife, and say, you know, that Gail is the model of the reasonable person. Like, how would this debate appeal to her? And you might know other people like that. So yes, the independent voters have a great deal of hidden power, and we won't know what they think until we count the votes.
Maybe a final question that I think we can end on is comment on, just requested to talk about taxation policies and what impacts do those have on PA and the country.
Okay, well, I mean, tax policy is a big issue that is being debated. President Trump had his tax cuts a few years ago. Biden and Harris say they're going to repeal those tax cuts, even as they say that they would not be raising taxes on people who make less than $400,000 a year. Biden says that he would equalize the difference between capital gains tax and income taxes, which means that capital gains taxes would go up. And we were talking about the real estate market. That has a big impact upon the real estate market as well as the stock market. So both parties traditionally have the view that the Democratic Party is more likely to, I think, raise taxes, at least for some people. The Republican Party says that it will not increase taxes and uses you know, references to cut them. I think one of the issues in the recovery from the lockdown is been debated whether the payroll tax ought to be reduced. And some people have suggested that it's better to actually cut taxes than to cut checks for some of the stimulus relief. But we will see. I mean, Biden is from Delaware, which is a very pro-corporate state because so many corporations have their headquarters in Delaware, particularly the banking industry. And so there's a lot that's up in the air in the race in terms of not only the electoral outcome, but in terms of the actual policy which will emerge as a result of this election. And that's where the makeup of the U.S. Senate is so important, because whoever the president is, he will need to get that through the Congress. And basically the future of the U.S. Congress is determined by who controls the U.S. Senate at this point.
Thank you very much for that. We did have one more come in, so I know I said we would wrap, but I do want to try to make sure we address all of the questions that have been asked. And it's really around the nature of the more affluent neighborhoods, kind of leaning more left. And just curious, that specifically was noted is, as we see Peters Township and the affluence grow there, will that sort of be more like Mount Lebanon and go in that direction? And I don't know if you can maybe speak to just more the just affluence leading to that, or that tendency more along those lines your opinion on that.
No, it's a very good question, and it is a mystery. One of the things I do is when my students return from going away for the weekend, I try to get a sense of what signs prevail in their hometowns or home jurisdictions. I don't know. We saw the change in the Washington County and the Greene County commissions in the last election. Was it a year ago? That's right. There was that shift, and that where traditionally they had been Democratic strongholds, and now they became Republican. How will that impact the presidential race? It is a mystery. And of course, not everyone puts a sign up in their front yard. And the other people, I don't put signs up in my yard. And what does that really mean? I don't know. So I wish I knew the answer, but we'll have more answers soon. And political scientists are going around and measuring the ratio of signs in different areas. Selena Zito, you may read her. She's in the Washington Examiner. Drove from Erie to Mount Morris on 19 and just did a statistical study of the signs. And we will see. You go up 19, there are a lot of signs for both candidates. I know just in Washington County a few days ago.
Just a final question as we wrap. Do you have any comments? And obviously, one of the most important things we can do is vote. So I know we would encourage everybody to do that. I think you'd noted that you'd even said as we were talking a little bit beforehand, some students are actually driving home, wherever home may be, from
That's
class
right.
that day to vote. What do you think voter turnout will be like this year?
It never is as high as we might think it should be. But I have a hunch across the country it's going to be very high. I heard that in Georgia, just started this week, that some people were waiting 5 hours to vote. And even though there's 3 weeks until the election, they thought it was very important to do it. So I think the personal dynamics coupled with the pandemic has underscored to so many people that this is really important. So we must take it seriously. And at the same time, I think that as regular citizens, we're called upon to promote goodwill between people because we live in a political system that perhaps because of social media is so paralyzed, so polarized. That's the word. I mean, it's polarized, which paralyzes good, honest discussion, which is what we must each do, I dare say, in our respective circles to bring people together.
Well, thank you so very much for all of your comments. It has been a pleasure talking with you today and learning from you. We're fortunate to have you in our region. We look forward to possibly talking with you again. Everybody, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention this morning. We hope this was helpful, and go vote. Thank you.
Perfect. Have a good day. Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you.